In this video, we will be gathering some context or background information about two key historical figures in preparation for comparing and contrasting their persuasive speeches. So our objective is comparing and contrasting how two speakers use rhetorical choices to advance their points of view or purpose and to evaluate their effectiveness. We will be looking at two very short speeches from these two historical figures, Chief Joseph and Susan B. Anthony. So first of all, let's talk about what context is. Context is the social, political, and cultural environment in which the text was created. And first, we will talk about social environment. So social environment is like the norms that are established and that we adhere to in different social settings. So in this first image, this is a picture of people that are in an interview, and then these are people that are just hanging out. And the social norms in an interview are that you dress professionally, you use language that is appropriate for the job, your posture may be more formal than if you're hanging out with your friends. So in those different social environments, we act differently. Next, let's talk about political environment. So political environment, I'm using this example of the political environment in Texas versus Connecticut. So as you guys know, I'm from Texas, and the political environment in Texas is much more conservative than it is up here in New England. So the majority of voters in Texas vote Republican and have more conservative views. Whereas in Connecticut, the majority of voters vote Democrat and have more progressive or liberal views. So if you are talking about different topics in each of these political environments, you're going to have a different response. And the way that you address key issues in each of these states, like if presidential candidates are visiting, would be vastly different based on their audience in each of those environments. The cultural environment is the values and beliefs and norms within a group of people who have a shared experience. So different cultures from different countries and within the same country share different values, beliefs, and norms. And if they go to a different culture, they might have what's called culture shock. So like when I moved up here to New England, there were some different things culturally that I had to kind of get used to and figure out how to interact with. And not saying any one culture is better or worse than the other, it's just that they are different. Let's talk about why we need context. Why are we spending the time getting this background information? So having that context allows readers to fully understand the purpose and the message of a text, and it provides clues about what the author's purpose and message might be. So if we are looking at a text from Martin Luther King Jr., we automatically think of the social, political, and cultural environment in which he was delivering his messages or his texts. So we think about the civil rights movement, his civil disobedience, what his values and beliefs were. And that helps give us clues about what his purpose is for speaking and what his intended message might be. All right, let's talk specifically about context for the first speech that we're going to be reading, which is On Surrender at Bear Paw Mountains. And I found this very short article that we will take a look at. So Chief Joseph was the chief of the Nez Perce tribe, and he surrendered to the U.S. Army General Nelson A. Miles in the Bear Paw Mountains of Montana, and this was in 1877. Earlier in that same year, the U.S. government broke a land treaty with the Nez Perce, and what that means is the United States at the time promised certain parts of the country to different Native American tribes, and the U.S. government broke that promise and forced those people out of their homeland in the Northwest, so like Oregon, Washington area, and forced them to relocate in Idaho. As they were relocating, Chief Joseph learned that 3 young Nez Perce warriors had killed white settlers and began a retreat. So because they were afraid that the U.S. Army would retaliate, fight back because of the white settlers being killed, Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce people fled toward Canada to seek refuge. Over the span of more than 3 months, Chief Joseph led fewer than 300 Nez Perce Indians toward Canada and covered over 1,000 miles as they battled more than 2,000 pursuing U.S. soldiers. So fewer than 300 Nez Perce Native Americans versus 2,000 U.S. soldiers. When Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce people were only 40 miles away from Canada, the Nez Perce were cornered and his people were forcibly relocated to a reservation. Okay, so he was promised at the time that they would be able to go back to their home, but the U.S. Army forced them to a reservation in Indian Territory at the time. Let's look at speaker, audience, and purpose based on that article. So the speaker in this speech is Chief Joseph, and he was said to have treated prisoners humanely, and he was respected by whites. So these are some things that we know about him that show us what his personality or what his character was like. Who he is speaking directly to, his audience, is the U.S. Army, and specifically this U.S. Army general. And what we know about the U.S. Army is that they had broken this land treaty, so they had already not kept their promise to the Nez Perce people at the time, and that they were seeking justice for these 3 white settlers who had been killed. The purpose of his speech is to deliver this message and surrender with the understanding that he and the Nez Perce people would be able to return home. So as you read the speech, we're keeping these different things in mind to help give us clues about what his message is and how and why these rhetorical choices that he makes are effective for this particular audience. Next, let's talk about Susan B. Anthony. She was alive from 1820 to 1905, and she was a prominent leader for women's suffrage or women's right to vote, and she gave speeches in both the United States and Europe. Along with fellow suffragette Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she created and produced a weekly publication that lobbied for or promoted women's rights, specifically their right to vote. After lobbying for the right to vote for many years, in 1872, Anthony took matters into her own hands and voted illegally in the presidential election. So at the time, women did not have the right to vote, so by voting, she was breaking the law. Anthony was arrested and unsuccessfully fought the charges and was fined $100, a fine that she never paid. I looked up the inflation calculator, and that is about $2,580 today, so a pretty significant fine. The speech that we are going to read is one that she delivered in order to explain why she broke the law, explain her own civil disobedience. Speaker, audience, and purpose for Susan B. Anthony's text. So the speaker is Susan B. Anthony, and what we know about her is that she is a feminist. That means that she believes that women should have equal rights and equal treatment as men, not that she thinks women are better than men. The audience is white male citizens with political power. So at the time, any men other than white men also did not have the right to vote, and she addresses that in her speech as well. So who she is speaking to is exclusively white male citizens who have political power or have the power to change laws and allow or give the right to vote to additional groups of people. And her purpose in speaking is to explain why she voted illegally, which was her own civil disobedience. And as you read that text, keep the speaker, audience, and purpose in mind, and use those clues to help identify the rhetorical choices she makes and how those work to persuade her specific audience.